All right. Hey, Marissa, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining us today for this webinar. Really appreciate your time. One of the things we get from Palisade all the time from our clients is we want to move to a cloud environment that's not necessarily Oracle's. And obviously Oracle doesn't like that as they're trying to push you to their cloud. So they throw up some roadblocks and things in front of you to guide you to their cloud versus the cloud perhaps that you want to go to. So on the way to going to the cloud that you want, many customers, many Oracle customers are faced with the fact that they have a Oracle ULA or they had an Oracle ULA. So that's what we want to talk about today. How do you go on that journey to the cloud provider that you want if you have an Oracle ULA? So I would say this comes up maybe in a third of our engagements. So it does happen all the time. Really quick introduction on me and Palisade Compliance. So Palisade, I started the company back in 2011, really as an independent organization, independent from Oracle, to help companies and public sector organizations deal with Oracle. And that could be whether you're being audited by Oracle, or you want to spend less with Oracle, or you want to renegotiate your contracts with Oracle, or now, like I said, we get a lot is we want to move to the cloud. We have Oracle. How do we do that? So we've been doing this at Palisade since 2011. And then before that, I was actually at Oracle for 16 years, where I was their global vice president of contracts and business practices and customer audits. So tons and tons of experience that I have on the Oracle side. And, we bring that experience every day. There's more than 20 of us at Palisade globally. And, all of us who deal with clients and work with you all are former Oracle folks, either in their contracts, business practices, or compliance teams. And we've got all kinds of technology that we use to help facilitate our client engagements. And I'll just show you here. Here's some quotes for some of our clients. And then finally, here's a list of some of our clients. So we have over 400 of them, like I said, all around the world. And we're dealing every day with customers who have Oracle ULAs and are trying to move to the cloud. So what I wanted to do today is break this presentation up into manageable segments. And it's the game of threes today. So we're going to talk about things that you need to understand as you're making that journey, what's in your contracts, what's not in your contracts, and what you can do right now, right? So the beauty of this presentation and the beauty and sometimes frustration working with Oracle is that you have a lot of authority or autonomy to move in the direction you want. You just need to know how to get there, right? Like I said, Oracle's nudging you in their direction, whether or not you want to go there. So let's get into the presentation. And this is the big picture slide, right? So these are the questions you need to ask, or our clients need to have answers for as they're making that journey. And the three big questions are, can you even deploy your licenses in a public cloud? If you can deploy in a public cloud, and I say public cloud, I mean non-Oracle cloud. So this could be a bare metal solution, a colo solution. It could be a real true public cloud. So can you deploy there? Can you deploy there contractually and technically? Once you make that decision that yes, you can deploy there, and pretty much the answer is almost always yes, then the question is, well, how do you count? How do you measure your license usage so that Oracle cannot come in there and hit you with a big non-compliance finding? And then finally, the third question that our customers ask all the time, and we'll talk about this one briefly, it's a little bit outside the scope here, is, okay, I can move, I know how to count, will Oracle support my deployments? So we'll talk a little bit about that today and sort of how to manage that process. So those are really the three questions that you all need to answer as you go down that journey. And the way we talk about answering those questions, and you're going to hear me say this 100 times today, is what does your contract say? right? So what does your contract say? What's in your contract? What's not in your contract? And then to a lesser extent, we don't want to completely um, not take this into account is, does Oracle have a policy on this? And is that policy in your contract or not? And that's really an important distinction, because some policies are part of your contract, some policies are not part of your contract. So we'll get into those details in a couple of minutes here. But before we do, what I'd like is just to put up a poll question, because these poll questions will help me as we go through the rest of the presentation. So the question is, what's your current status with an Oracle ULA? And each one of these statuses will put you in a different direction or a different path, or require that you do different things. So you have a ULA and it's more than a year until it expires. It's less than a year until it expires. You had a ULA, but you got out of it. You never had a ULA, or maybe you just don't know. So again, we see a wide variety of folks that customer situations that present themselves to us, from customers who never had a ULA. And then we have some clients who literally signed a new ULA in May of this year, and they're already now thinking about moving to the cloud. And how do they do that within the constraints of something they just signed? So Marissa, let's see the results to that. So I said there's a wide variety, and there you go. We've got a little bit in each category. So some, let's see, 30, almost 40% have a ULA in some fashion. Another 25% had and got out of it. And then, some never had it. And we see that specifically with larger companies. There's a smaller percentage that have never had a ULA, but that does come up once in a while, and 25% don't know. So you should probably find that out as you're going through that journey. So we see typically, and we sort of just touched on this, 3 different situations that customers find themselves in, and these will guide you as you go down that journey. And that's, again, you have a ULA that's about to expire, one that's you've got a little runway, and the third one is you do not have an existing ULA. And that could mean that you have already certified out of it, or you never had a ULA. So there's sort of 2 examples there. And these are the buckets that we're going to talk about today. So it's really important to first figure out, where you are. If this was a flow chart, this would be the first question that you would ask. Where are you in that process? So as you think about having a ULA, and some of this also applies for companies who don't have ULAs. So I know the whole purpose of this webinar today is to talk about those who have ULAs. So that's where we're going to focus. There's 3 clauses in your agreements with Oracle that I really want you to focus on. Now, there are many important clauses, but these are the 3 that we want to focus on today. The first clause is what we call the entire agreement clause. And that is actually not in your ULA, but it is in your master agreement. So that could be an OLSA, an SLSA, an OMA, what have you. And the entire agreement clause really defines what's included and what's not included in that contractual relationship with Oracle. And generally, the entire agreement clause says that the contract applies and any URLs that are in your contract apply, and nothing else matters, right? That's, a high level, what that entire agreement clause states. Obviously, if you negotiated it, yours might be a little bit different. So that is the clause that we go back to, and we're going to talk about what's not in your ULA. That's the clause we hang our hats on when Oracle tries to bring in policy documents that are not in your contract. We always go back to Oracle and say, well, that's great that you have that policy document, Oracle, but I have this contract with you that says none of those things apply. So why do you think it needs to apply here? So the entire agreement clause is actually something that's really critical, and it's not in your ULA. So you want to look at that really carefully to see if you've negotiated something different. The next big thing, and it's really on point here, is the certification language in your ULA. And usually that's, I think, section B1 in these ULAs. Take a look at that. This language has changed over time. So, back in the day, 7, 8 years ago, when Oracle wasn't trying to be a big cloud player, there were no restrictions in the original ULAs that talked about certifications in in a non-Oracle cloud, right? It's only over time where Oracle has tried to move into this space where they have put in some restrictions. So we'll see ULAs today that say specifically you cannot certify anything in a public cloud. The only thing you can certify is on-premise or Oracle, right? We've seen that. And we've seen every variation between that and you can certify deployments anywhere. And this certification language is really key. And we'll talk about this part in a minute when you figure out if you've actually already deployed in the cloud, because it's very specific the way this works. Traditional ULAs, and again, I'm going to talk about most ULAs, yours could be different. During your ULA, 3 years, you can deploy anywhere you want. You want to deploy in a public cloud, you want to deploy on a third-party bare metal solution, you want to deploy in Oracle, you want to deploy on-premise, great. After you certify, usually you can deploy anywhere you want. It's just the point of certification. And certification is the day you have to tell Oracle how much stuff you're using. So it's that count where Oracle typically tries to prevent you from certifying what's in a public cloud. So for example, if you have 1,000 licenses you've deployed on premise, you certify to 1,000, and then after ULA, you can use those 1,000 wherever you want. If you've deployed 1,000 on premise and let's say 500 in a non-Oracle cloud, in this scenario, you can only certify 1,000. So all of a sudden, now you've certified 1,000 licenses, you have usage of 1,000, but you're really using 1,500. So you've got a big compliance issue there. So that's how Oracle, that's the gotcha in the certification language. So you really want to look at that closely to determine the limitations on a cloud deployment. And we're going to talk about some non-contractual things in a second, right? So you think that's a little complex? Well, wait till we add the layer of policy on top of it. So, look at that in terms of what can you deploy during the ULA, after the ULA, and then at the point in time of certification. That's the big gotcha, that is one of the big gotchas where customers typically find a problem when they get to the end of their ULA. The last thing we want to point out is Oracle's also made some changes in the certification language on what's required to certify. In previous years, you just give Oracle your number and that was the number, right? But Oracle has now put their audit team in the middle of every ULA. So every time you have a ULA, you're going to deal with Oracle's audit team. We'll talk about that in a second. But sometimes you have to provide Oracle more information for your certification. Sometimes you have to provide them less information. Again, the way that contract reads, it's not very specific in how that information needs to be applied. So there's a lot of wiggle room. There's a lot of negotiation room in exactly what you have to and don't have to do. But there's definitely been some changes there. And that could affect, how you deploy, right? It's just the process by which you have to certify now. So you want to look at those things. So your entire agreement clause, your certification language, and then, as far as cloud deployments, and then the how you have to certify. Those are all key considerations as you go down that journey. Now, things that are not in your Oracle ULA, right? So these are I'll call them the gotchas or other things that Oracle lays on top of the complexity of a ULA. Oracle's goals are not in your Oracle ULA, right? So let's be clear. Oracle's goal is 1, that you renew that ULA, you don't certify it, and 2, that you move to Oracle Cloud. So while you might have a goal of certifying out of your ULA and moving to a non-Oracle cloud, be that AWS or Azure or Google Cloud or IBM, any of those big organizations, Oracle has no interest in you going there, right? So you're going to have one set of goals, they're going to have another. And it's pretty clear Oracle's goals. Look at all those groups they're putting in your way of certification. LMS, SIA, and GLASS are three names of Oracle's audit teams, right? So they keep changing their names. I don't know why they do that, but it makes it a little more difficult for folks to identify when they're being audited. And then you've got sales teams who also have their own folks with the word license in their title. So you've got all these different groups coming at you during your ULA, offering you free help on certification or license optimization. And really, it's free help to get you to buy more Oracle. I hate to be that blunt, but you just need to go into that. It's not to say that ULAs are bad. It's just to say you just need to understand. And then there's two policy documents that I really want to talk about here that are not in your Oracle ULA. One of them is licensing Oracle technology in the cloud, and the other one is Oracle's partitioning policy documents. So let me go over to those real quick. So let's look at the one on the right. This is licensing Oracle in a cloud computing environment. Remember, it's not part of your contract, but it can be beneficial for you if you choose to use it. So Oracle has come up with this idea of an authorized cloud environment, and they even capitalize it, right? And put quotes around it, like to make believe it's important or something. So again, I'm not really sure what an authorized cloud environment is other than what Oracle says right here, but it really has no impact on your contracts unless you let it. So in this document, Oracle authorizes Amazon and Microsoft clouds. However, customers use lots of cloud providers that are not on this list. So, and they're totally allowed to unless their contract says something different. So if you want to roll out to Google Cloud, great. If you want to roll out to IBM, great. Unless your contract has some other provision in it that would prevent you. The real scary thing about this document is it could change at any moment, right? So a lot of people take comfort in it, saying, hey, I'm going to roll out to Amazon because it's an authorized cloud provider. And that's great, and you should. But what if Oracle changes it tomorrow and Amazon's off the list, right? This document has changed quite a bit over the years. So there's nothing that prevents Oracle from doing that. The other question that we brought up before is, how to count, how to measure your usage. And again, many Oracle customers will look at this document to determine, how they should count their licenses if they're rolling out on AWS or Microsoft, because they're listed here. Well, again, Oracle has changed this, right? So if you have to count, let's say, one virtual core for one processor licenses today, and you think, hey, that's pretty good. What if Oracle changes it tomorrow, right? And it takes, two processors for virtual core, right? Does that mean you then have to buy twice as many licenses to run on these cloud environments? So we've talked a lot over the years about, when to use this document and when not to use this document. So it's pretty clear. I think if you go at the bottom here, you'll see that it says, sorry, let me hide that. You'll see that it says it's for educational purposes only, and it can change at any time, and it's not part of the contract. So this document here on the right is good when it works for you, and it's bad when it doesn't. And it's really important you understand, how to leverage it. So if your cloud journey is taking you to AWS, you want to leverage the heck out of this document. If your cloud journey is taking you to Google Cloud, then you don't want to leverage this, right? You don't want to be trapped into someone saying, well, that's not an authorized cloud provider, you can't do it, right? So just, watch that situation. And then on the left here, this is Oracle's partitioning policies. And again, we bring this up because this is the how to count, right? So this, again, is same as before. It's not in your contract. This is usually applied to VMware environments, on-prem VMware environments, but now it's becoming more prevalent as customers are moving to cloud environments that are not listed as authorized, whatever authorized means. So you just want to understand this. And again, just like the cloud computing policy, it's subject to change at any time. And look, this one was just changed recently, last month. So, it doesn't mean just because Oracle changes, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to listen to it or that you have to ignore it, right? There's some room in the middle there if you want to take it. So those are the things that are not in your Oracle ULA. And we're going to tie all this stuff together, as we get to the end and talk about what you can do. So as you're thinking about your cloud environments and your cloud move, I'm going to start giving you some client stories here. The first thing is you want to really understand your client goals. So we have one client who's moving to a third-party cloud, not an Oracle cloud, and they had two goals. They wanted to move to a third-party cloud, and they wanted to reduce their Oracle costs. Unfortunately, their contracts were really drafted in Oracle's favor. They were really non-standard, really complex, and specifically prevented some cloud deployments that they wanted to go to. So, they had to make a choice, right? What was more important to them? Was it moving to the cloud of their choice now or later, or saving some money on Oracle? So when I say save some money, I mean reduce your spend, your support spend. The way they put it is we had two souls. Craig, we have two souls, and we don't know which way to go. So they had to make a choice as to which direction they wanted to go. Do they want to follow the third-party cloud, or they wanted to make immediate cuts to their support spend? We could get them, Palisade could get them to either goal, but we couldn't get them to both at the same time. So they had to decide, here's where we want to go first, and then once we achieve that, then we'll go over here later. And we have definitely helped them on their journey. So, other things to understand in addition to, which cloud provider is, the spend piece, right? Do you want to certify your ULA or do you want to renew it? So many times we'll get into a situation where a customer has sort of negotiated themselves into a corner. So they're prevented from doing exactly what they want to do. So there is sometimes a renegotiation of that Oracle ULA that's required, and that requires an additional spend with Oracle. Sometimes it's not required, and we can figure out a path to get them where they want to go. But really, that's up to the client to determine, what they feel comfortable with in terms of their licensing rules and restrictions. So you really want to understand at all levels, especially the executive level, is what's the most important goals for your company as you're going down this path, right? So, does it have to be that particular cloud? Can it be this other particular cloud? Are you thinking about Oracle? What do your contracts say? What are the most important things you want to accomplish? The second thing you can do now is understand where you are in your journey. So this is, a common situation where Oracle customers will get towards the end of their ULA and they'll come to us and say, we want to help certify. And then we found they've made all these cloud deployments and their contracts prevent them from certifying those deployments. So it causes a problem, right? At the point of certification, they're either going to be non-compliant or they got to change how they've deployed and pull back on some of those cloud deployments, which is untenable. So you really want to understand wherever you are in your journey with Oracle's ULA. If your ULA expires in November at the end of this month, you really want to know this now, right? If it expires in May of 2021, you've got a little bit of time to do some digging, and then you can adjust, right? The other thing you want to understand if you have a ULA is what is your ability to certify? If the ULA ended today, could you certify? Would you be able to pull together those numbers? Would you be in compliance? Would you have a way to communicate that information to Oracle that would not get you audited and sort of not force you into an unexpected spend, right? So if you have the ability to certify, if you know your position, you'll have much more leverage with Oracle later and much more freedom. It's companies who can't certify, or aren't sure of their certification position, those are the ones where we see problems with compliance issues, with additional spend that is really not required, or being forced into making Oracle Cloud purchases, even when maybe there's no real intention of using those cloud credits. So you really want to understand. So, and then finally, again, like I said, wherever you are in your ULA journey, wherever you are in your current deployments, you got to start planning from that position, right? We can't roll back the clock and say, oh, if we had done this or had done that. There's always a path forward towards a third-party cloud. It's just a matter of, does it require you to certify and get past that certification point so that you can deploy later? Does it require you to renegotiate the ULA so that certification won't present an issue and post-ULA management won't have an issue for you? Does it mean you have to give Oracle more money, or you can avoid giving them more money? Sort of those are things that would be really good to know. We have not had a single customer come to us and say, we want to move to that cloud over there, and where we've not been able to help them. There is always a path. It's sort of like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Our clients always have the power, if they understand, their contracts, how to deal with all those policies that Oracle tries to lay over those contracts, and then how to deal with Oracle itself, their sales teams, their audit teams, their license experts, the cloud push, all of those things. And then, I know we didn't really talk about this today, but there is, once you get through all the contractual and licensing issues, there's always that underlying question of, will Oracle support my deployments, right? So this is, part of this is one policy that is included in your contract. So in every Oracle license agreement, there's a link to Oracle's technical support policies. And from there, you can follow, what Oracle will do and won't do. And there's several questions, and we're not going to go too deep into this, but, can I technically deploy on the cloud? Will Oracle provide support for me? And is this a certified way of deploying Oracle? Is Oracle certified this stack, let's say? And again, we've had customers be told by Oracle that they can't do something and Oracle will never support that. And then they've gone and deployed on those clouds and then logged tickets with Oracle to see if Oracle will respond, if Oracle will support them. And I will tell you that the Oracle support on a third-party cloud is just as good or bad as it is if you were on premise or in an authorized cloud environment. So, take that. If you think Oracle support is good, you're probably going to think it's good in a third-party cloud. If you think Oracle support is poor, it's going to be just as poor on a third-party cloud. So, we haven't seen that be a real deal breaker. You're always able to deploy or reproduce software issues and tickets on a bare metal solution if that comes down to that. So again, there are ways to log those tickets with Oracle to get them to support you. And again, this is really a comfort issue for customers. Some customers want in the contract that, yes, Oracle will support us on that platform. And there is a path to get there, and we've helped customers do that. But that costs money, right? So that costs money with Oracle. So we go back to the two souls of, do you want to spend more or do you want to move to the cloud? And then if you move to the cloud, how certain do you want to be that Oracle is going to pick up the phone, right? Does it need to be in the contract, or can you test it out and see in practice how that works? So these are all things that you can do without getting Oracle involved, without sort of extending too much effort. It's sort of getting your house in order so that you can go in the right direction with Oracle. And then, I'm going to wrap up with, 3 ways, my little commercial here, 3 ways that Palisade can help you. And I've highlighted one at the bottom because this is the thing that we see over and over again the last couple of years. Is we call it strategy support or decision support, helping clients through that journey, whether it's through education, or practical compliance work or renegotiations, is figure out, okay, here's where we are today. Here's where we want to be in a couple of years. What's the best way to get from today to 2 years from now with our Oracle contracts? So really helping, should you certify? Should you renegotiate? Is there a different way to license this software? What's the best way for you to get bang for your buck here with the Oracle spend that you've already made? And sort of what are the options? What's happening in the industry? So we do a lot of work helping customers do that. And then, from a more tactical, that's the strategic side. From the more tactical thing or point of view, we can obviously help you manage your ULAs and certify out of your ULAs. And we could also help you renew or renegotiate your ULAs. So again, wherever you are, it usually starts with decision support and strategy support. Where do you want to go? What are the best options? And then moves into those other two phases of, okay, now we've sort of figured out where you are. A renegotiation is the best way forward, or certification could be the best way forward. Or you go down both paths at the same time and see what comes out at the end and what is the best option there. So it really is, again, there is a method to the madness on sort of getting through and managing these ULAs. But anyway, these are the ways that we can help you. Now, I know I crammed a lot into that discussion, and we did receive a few questions from folks before, and I think I answered most of them in this conversation. But if there's more, you can always put them in the chat. I don't know, Marissa, do we have any other questions that have come in from people?
So we have no questions in the chat. It looks like a lot of the questions were already answered. So we do have a couple that came in earlier that may or may not have been answered. Are there certain restrictions around which cloud I can move my license to after the licenses have already been certified?
So again, it's a really good question, and there's two places to look. The first place is in your ULA. It's that certification language section, because that will typically say something like, you certify and you have to tell us how many you're using, and you cannot count what's in a cloud deployment. Sometimes there's some language after that says, once you certify, everything you certified in the cloud has to stay in the cloud, or everything you certify on-prem has to stay on-prem. Sometimes there's no language towards that, right? So you really want to look at that section itself. Again, I think it's B1 that talks about the certification itself and what you can do. If it's silent, right? My thought is, if it's silent, then you could deploy anywhere, right? So once you get past what's in your contract, then you have to go back to this document, right? It's this licensing in the cloud. So I tend to ignore this document unless it helps me, right? So for example, if you, in that question, wanted to move to Google Cloud, and Oracle said to you, someone at Oracle, there's 100,000 people over there. There's someone who's going to say these things. We've seen it. You can't use Google Cloud because it's not an authorized cloud provider. Like we've seen those emails, right? And it's just, I don't think that's true, right? This document doesn't say you can't use an authorized cloud provider. And it's not in your contract, right? So you just sort of have to get past this. You have to be very knowledgeable. So if you wanted to move to one of these two, Amazon, Azure, you get past your contract, ULA, I would point to this. If you wanted to move to something that wasn't on this list, I would just get past your contract and I would understand why this doesn't apply. So 9 times out of 10, yes, you can move to a cloud. You just want to be careful on how you do it.
Great.
What else do we have, Marissa?
We have one more question. Do you think that moving to a third-party cloud is more cost-effective than moving to Oracle's cloud?
Well, I guess you'll have to get some pricing. I mean, Oracle's got some different cloud models. I guess one advantage or disadvantage depending on how you look at it, is Oracle can bundle in the cloud and licensing piece, right? So in theory, that could be good. The downside of that is you've already bought your licenses. So you've paid Oracle for all those licenses. And unfortunately, the way Oracle is pushing those conversions, it's like, well, get rid of all your on-prem licenses that you already paid for us, right? And we'll take some of your support dollars and put them to cloud credits. And customers think, oh, look, I reduced my support costs. What you did is you gave up all those licenses and you sort of locked yourself in. The other challenge with Oracle Cloud, and again, I'm looking at it from a position where most customers are not moving in that direction. So I've got a slightly different opinion, is once you're in Oracle's cloud, you have no ability really to defend yourself in an audit, right? So if Oracle goes in there, if you're using sort of their OCI where you bring your own licenses, you've got all your deployments there, and you could see these policies I have up here are subject to interpretation, and an Oracle could make claims of non-compliance before you have a chance to sort of figure out what your position is with them. So I'm really hesitant. I think, and it's an amazing problem Oracle has. They've got a $20 billion support business with 95% margins, which they just don't want to really eat into that much. They want to protect those 95% margins. So as you're moving to Oracle Cloud, your Oracle costs don't go down, they only go up. So if you spend $1 million a year on Oracle support and you want to move to Oracle Cloud, you're going to spend $2, $3, $4 million a year with Oracle, right? So when you think about that TCO, of course, if you're on a cloud environment, you're not going to have hardware and data centers and maybe reduced number of personnel. So those costs could go down. So it's a really hard one to determine, right? You'd need, and we've helped customers do this. I want to see what the Oracle contract offer says. I want to see what the other cloud provider, and I want to look at all the different costs and risks involved. So I think you need to look at all of those things when you're making that move.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, Marissa?
So it looks like we just got one more in the Q&A box. We are moving our P6 to Oracle Cloud and have a myriad of old licenses from version 8 to version 18. Am I to understand that we should certify these licenses and we can then keep them?
So again, I'm going to give an answer based on never having read this contract. But if you have a current ULA and you want to move to the cloud later, sure, why not certify them and keep them? We have and here's why. We have a customer who was licensed Oracle software on-premise. Before they were our customer, Oracle convinced them to turn in all those licenses for cloud credits. So they ended up, again, they were spending $1 million approximately. They then were spending $2 million with Oracle. Well, now they want to leave Oracle Cloud and they want to run on AWS in this case. They have no licenses. So if they were to move to AWS, they would now have to go back to Oracle and buy those same licenses for a second time and now run them on AWS. So you really get trapped. So I like when you can, because there are 40 years of legacy licenses out there. If you can hold on to your on-prem and bring your own license, I like that approach better in general than when you are a complete, let's say, red stack and running everything through their cloud without the ability to get out. We have another client who, unfortunately, because of what's happening in the world with the pandemic, they are struggling for cash, and they signed, again, before they were our client, a big cloud deal with Oracle, and they're not paying their bills, right? So they're in a dispute with Oracle over. They're in a negotiation with Oracle over how to pay those, and again, folks at Oracle, it's a big organization. They have folks in their accounts payable who have said, I've seen the emails, you need to pay us. And if you don't, we're not only going to deny your access, but we're going to delete your data. So do you really want to be there? Is that how you want to do business? So you just want to be careful and eyes wide open as you go into this. Any other questions, Marissa, before we wrap up?
That was all of our questions for today. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Marissa, for hosting us here. Thanks to everyone for attending. I appreciate the great questions. If you need any help, like we said before, with anything around Oracle, please reach out to us at Palisade Compliance. You can email us. You can visit our website. We've got a pretty good LinkedIn presence. Got lots and lots of videos on YouTube. I think we've got up to 40 or 50 videos on there. We'll take this presentation and put it on there at some point as well. So there's lots of great information for self-education. And if you need a little bit more, please just give us a ring. Okay, thanks everybody for your time today, and good luck with Oracle.